Captain Jake Morrison sat in his command chair aboard the USS Endeavour, watching the stars blur past the main view screen. His crew had been testing humanity's first faster-than-light drive for 3 months now, making short jumps between star systems near Earth. Today was supposed to be their longest jump yet, taking them further from home than any human had ever traveled. Lisa Park, his navigation officer, looked up from her console with a frown. "Captain, I'm getting some strange readings from the drive core," she said, her fingers dancing across the controls. "The energy patterns don't match our calculations." Tony Rodriguez, the chief engineer, was already pulling up diagnostic screens on his station. His dark eyes reflected the glow of warning lights that had begun flashing across his panel. "The quantum field generators are running hot," he reported, sweat beading on his forehead. "Way hotter than they should be." Jake felt a familiar knot form in his stomach. In his 20 years of military service, he had learned to trust that feeling. Something was about to go very wrong. "Can we abort the jump?" he asked, keeping his voice calm despite the growing concern. Amy Carter, the communications specialist, shook her head as she worked frantically at her station. "The field is already forming, Captain. We're locked in now." Her blonde hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail, but several strands had escaped and hung around her worried face. The ship began to vibrate, a low hum that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Jake gripped his armrests as the vibration grew stronger. Through the view screen, he could see space itself beginning to twist and bend around them. Colors that had no names danced across the darkness. "Hull integrity holding," Tony called out over the increasing noise. "But I don't know for how much longer." Lisa's console erupted in a shower of sparks, forcing her to jump back from her station. "Navigation is offline," she shouted. "I have no idea where we're going." The ship lurched violently to one side, throwing everyone against the restraints. Jake felt his teeth rattle as the Endeavour spun through dimensions that human science barely understood. Warning alarms blared throughout the bridge, adding to the chaos. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. The view screen showed normal space again, filled with unfamiliar stars. Jake looked around his bridge, checking on his crew. Everyone appeared shaken, but unhurt. The warning lights had stopped flashing, and the ship's systems seemed to be functioning normally again. "Report," Jake ordered, running a hand through his. Graying-haired Tony was the first to respond. "Drive core is stable, but it's completely drained. We won't be jumping anywhere for at least a week." He paused, studying his readings more carefully. "Captain, according to these energy signatures, we traveled a lot further than we intended." Lisa had managed to get her station back online and was working to determine their location. "I'm not picking up any familiar star patterns," she said, her voice tight with worry. "We're definitely not in Kansas anymore." Amy suddenly straightened at her station, pressing her headset closer to her ear. "Captain, I'm picking up radio signals. Multiple sources, and they're not human." Jake felt his pulse quicken. First contact with alien life had always been a possibility on these deep space missions, but they had expected it to happen much closer to Earth. "Put it on speakers," he ordered. The bridge filled with strange sounds, clicks, whistles, and tones that no human throat could produce. The patterns seemed organized, like language, but unlike anything in Earth's databases. "Can you make any sense of it?" Jake asked. Amy shook her head. "The computer is trying to find patterns, but it's completely alien." "Wait." She held up a hand as new signals came through. "I'm detecting weapons fire." Lisa looked up from her navigation console with wide eyes. "Captain, I'm reading multiple ships on long-range sensors. Large ships, and they appear to be in combat." Jake stood from his chair and walked to the main view screen. In the distance, tiny flashes of light marked what could only be a space battle between unknown forces. How far away are they? About 2 million kilometers, Lisa replied. But Captain, some of those ships are huge. The largest ones are bigger than anything we've ever built. Tony whistled low under his breath. Whoever they are, they've got technology we can only dream about. As they watched, the flashing lights suddenly stopped. The battle, whatever it had been about, was over. Jake was about to order a course away from the area when Amy spoke up again. Captain, the radio chatter has changed. They're not fighting anymore, and I think they're talking about us. About us? Jake asked. How could they know we're here? Our drive malfunction probably lit up every sensor in the system, Tony explained. The energy discharge was pretty spectacular. Lisa's console beeped urgently. Captain, multiple ships are breaking off from the main groups. They're heading our way fast. Jake returned to his command chair and buckled himself in. How fast is fast? They'll be here in about 20 minutes at their current speed, Lisa replied, her fingers flying over her controls as she tracked the approaching vessels. Amy's equipment crackled with new transmissions. Captain, they're trying to communicate with us. The computer thinks it's found a basic mathematical pattern in their signals. Can we respond? Jake asked. I can try to send back the same mathematical sequence, Amy said. It might let them. No, we're intelligent. Do it, Jake ordered. Amy transmitted their response, and within minutes, the alien chatter increased dramatically. I think we got their attention, she said with a nervous laugh. The first alien ships appeared on the view screen as silver dots against the stars. As they drew closer, Jake could see they were sleek and elegant, with curves and lines that suggested both beauty and danger. They moved with a grace that human ships couldn't match. 12 ships total, Lisa reported. They're surrounding us, but they haven't powered weapons. One of the alien vessels, larger than the others, moved closer too. The Endeavor. Jake could see details now. Smooth metal surfaces that seemed to flow like water, and lights that pulsed in patterns he didn't recognize. Captain, Amy said suddenly, I'm getting a transmission on a frequency our computers can understand. It's in English. Jake raised an eyebrow. English? How is that possible? They must have analyzed our computer systems somehow, Tony suggested. These people are way ahead of us technologically. The main view screen changed, showing the interior of the alien ship. A tall, thin creature with pale blue skin and large dark eyes stared back at them. It wore robes that seemed to shift color as it moved. I am Ambassador Zeeth Kar of the Galactic Dominion, the creature said in accented but clear English. You have entered our space without permission. Prepare to be boarded. Jake looked around at his crew, then back at the screen. I'm Captain Jake Morrison of the Earth vessel USS Endeavor. We didn't mean to enter your space. Our faster-than-light drive malfunctioned and brought us here by accident. Zethkar's large eyes seemed to study Jake carefully. Earth? We have no record of this planet in our databases. You are from an unknown species. That's right, Jake replied. We're humans, and this is our first time leaving our home star system. The alien ambassador appeared surprised by this admission. A new species ventures into space, he said, more to himself than to Jake. How interesting. You will surrender your vessel and submit to Dominion authority for processing. Jake felt his crew tense around him. He had spent his entire career in Earth's military, and he knew an ultimatum when he heard one. But he also knew that these aliens could probably destroy his ship without breaking a sweat. With respect, Ambassador, Jake said calmly, we'd prefer to just head home. We're not looking for any trouble. Zethkar's expression changed to what might have been confusion. You refuse to submit to the Dominion? This is not possible. All new species submit upon first contact. Well, Jake said with a slight smile, I guess we're not like most species. Thanks for the offer, but we'll pass. Now, can someone point? Use toward home? We've got places to be. The silence that followed stretched for long seconds as the alien ambassador stared at the human captain, who had just politely declined to surrender to a galactic empire. Ambassador Zethkar stared at Captain Morrison for several long moments, his large dark eyes blinking slowly as if he were trying to process something impossible. Behind him, other alien figures moved about their ship's bridge, their pale blue, skin catching the strange light from their control panels. You refuse the Dominion's authority, Zethkar said finally, his voice carrying a tone of disbelief. In 10,000 years of expansion, no species has ever refused. This cannot be. Jake leaned back in his command chair, completely relaxed despite being surrounded by 12 alien warships. Well, there's a first time for everything, he said, with a shrug. Look, we appreciate the welcome wagon, but we really just want to go home. Tony Rodriguez looked up from his engineering station where he had been quietly studying the alien ship's energy signatures. Captain, their technology is impressive, but it's not as advanced as I expected. A lot of their systems look like they haven't been updated in centuries. Zethkar's head turned sharply toward Tony, and for the first time, the ambassador looked genuinely surprised. You dare to analyze Dominion technology? Your primitive sensors cannot comprehend our superiority. Actually, Tony said, pulling up a holographic display of the alien ship's power systems, your fusion reactors are running at about 60% efficiency. We figured out how to get 90% efficiency about 50 years ago. And those plasma conduits could use some work too. The alien ambassador's skin seemed to darken slightly, which Jake guessed might be the equivalent of a blush. Impossible. The Dominion has perfected these technologies over millennia. Lisa Parks spoke up from her navigation station, where she had been plotting their location based on stellar positions. Captain, according to my calculations, we're about 15,000 light-years from Earth. If their ships are this advanced, why haven't they explored our region of space? Because, Zethkar said, regaining some of his composure, the Dominion expands only as needed. We do not waste resources on empty space when there are civilizations to govern. Amy Carter had been quietly listening to alien communications chatter from the surrounding ships. Captain, I'm picking up transmissions between their vessels. The computer has started translating some of it, and it sounds like they're confused about us. Confused how? Jake asked. They keep referring to something called the submission protocol, and how it's never failed before, Amy replied. They seem to think we're malfunctioning somehow. Jake couldn't help but smile at that. Malfunctioning? That's a new one. Zethkar's image flickered slightly on the view screen, and Jake realized the alien was probably discussing the situation with his superiors. When the ambassador returned his attention to the humans, his expression had hardened. You will accompany us to the Dominion capital world, Zethkar announced. There, you will witness the glory of our civilization and understand why submission is the only logical choice. And if we refuse? Jake asked. Then you will be destroyed as a threat to galactic stability. The ambassador replied matter-of-factly. Jake looked around at his crew. Tony was shaking his head slightly, indicating that the Endeavor's weapons would be useless against the alien fleet. Lisa had calculated their odds of outrunning the alien ships and was also shaking her head. Amy was monitoring communications and could probably tell them if the aliens were preparing to attack. Well, Jake said finally, I guess we could use a vacation. Lead the way, Ambassador. The journey to the Dominion capital took 3 days, during which the human crew got their first real look at galactic civilization. They passed space stations the size of small moons, each one bustling with ships from dozens of different species. Jake was impressed by the scale of it all, but also noticed something troubling. "Amy, are you seeing this communication pattern?" he asked as they observed one of the larger stations. Amy nodded grimly. "The different species aren't talking to each other as equals, Captain. There's a clear hierarchy in how they communicate. Some species seem to be giving orders, while others only respond with acknowledgments. It's like a caste system," Lisa observed, "but based on species rather than individuals." Tony was studying the technical aspects of what they were seeing. "Captain, a lot of these species have technologies that complement each other perfectly. The fish-like beings seem to be experts at water processing, while those rock creatures are obviously great at mining. But they're not sharing their knowledge." "What do you mean?" Jake asked. "I mean, the fish people are using primitive mining equipment, and the rock people are using terrible water purification systems. It's like each species is only allowed to be good at one thing." Dr. Susan Wright, the ship's xenobiologist, had been quietly observing the alien species they encountered. "Captain, I'm seeing something disturbing in their behavior patterns. The species that seem to be in charge carry themselves confidently, while the others show clear signs of submission and fear." When they finally reached the Dominion capital world, Jake understood the scale of what they were dealing with. The planet was entirely covered in one massive city, with buildings that stretched up into the atmosphere and space elevators reaching toward orbital platforms. Ships from hundreds of different worlds came and went in carefully organized patterns. "Impressive," Jake admitted as their small fleet approached the planet. "Now you begin to understand," Sethkar said from the view screen. "The Dominion has brought order to chaos, peace to conflict, and prosperity to all who serve." "Serve being the key word," Jake muttered under his breath. They were directed to a landing platform near what appeared to be the government district. As the Endeavour touched down, Jake could see crowds of aliens gathering to stare at the new arrival. Most looked curious, but he noticed that many of the smaller, less impressive-looking species were being pushed back by larger, more official-looking beings. "Full dress uniforms," Jake ordered his crew. "If we're going to meet galactic civilization, we might as well look our best." The airlock cycled open, and Jake stepped out onto the platform with his senior staff behind him. The air was breathable, though it smelled of ozone and unfamiliar vegetation. The gravity was slightly lighter than Earth normal, making each step feel like a small bounce. Zethkar was waiting for them, along with several other official-looking aliens. "Welcome to Veltara Prime, capital of the Galactic Dominion," he said formally. "You are now in the presence of Elder Commander Hiskthar." The being that stepped forward was clearly of the same species as Zethkar, but larger and more imposing. His robes were more elaborate, and he carried himself with obvious authority. "So these are the defiant humans," he said, his voice deeper than the ambassador's. "They appear quite ordinary." Jake stepped forward and extended his hand in the traditional human greeting. "Captain Jake Morrison, representing the human species. Thank you for your hospitality." Hiskthar stared at the extended hand as if it were some kind of weapon. Several of the other aliens took a step back. "What is the meaning of this gesture?" the Elder Commander asked. "It's called a handshake," Jake explained, still holding out his hand. "It's how humans greet each other as equals." The word equals seemed to cause a stir among the assembled aliens. Hiskthar's skin darkened noticeably. "Equals? You are a new species, barely capable of interstellar travel. You cannot be equal to the Dominion's leadership." Jake lowered his hand, but his expression remained friendly. "Well, where we come from, we judge people by their actions, not their age or species. Maybe we do things differently." Amy Carter had been quietly listening to the conversations around them and suddenly touched Jake's arm. "Captain," she whispered, "some of the species in the crowd are asking each other what equals means. I don't think they've heard the concept before." Jake looked around at the gathered aliens and noticed that many of the smaller species were indeed listening intently to every word. Some appeared to be hiding behind larger beings, but their eyes were fixed on the humans with what looked like hope. "Perhaps," Hiskthar said coldly, "a tour of our civilization will help you understand the natural order of things. You will see how each species serves according to their abilities and station." "Sounds great," Jake replied cheerfully. "We're always interested in learning about new cultures." As they began walking through the massive city, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental was about to change. The human's simple presence seemed to be causing ripples throughout the carefully ordered Dominion society, and he wasn't sure if that was a good thing or a very dangerous thing. The tour of the Dominion capital began in what Elder Commander Hiskthar proudly called the Technology Center, a massive complex where the most advanced alien sciences were supposedly on display. Jake and his crew walked through halls lined with machines that hummed with barely contained energy, their purposes unclear, but their complexity obvious. "Behold the power generation systems that fuel our empire," Hiskthar announced, gesturing toward a room filled with enormous crystalline structures that pulsed with blue light. "These have provided stable energy for over 3,000 years." Tony Rodriguez stepped closer to examine the crystals, his engineer's instincts taking over. He pulled out a small scanner from his equipment belt and began taking readings. Within minutes, his face showed the kind of expression he usually reserved for particularly interesting puzzles. "Captain," Tony said quietly, "these crystals are amazing, but the way they're using them is incredibly inefficient. They're only extracting about 30% of the available energy." Hiskthar overheard the comment and turned sharply toward the human engineer. "You dare to criticize Dominion technology with your primitive instruments?" "Not criticizing," Tony replied with a friendly smile. "Just observing. These crystals could probably power this entire city if you adjusted the resonance frequency and added some focusing arrays." A small alien with grayish skin and 4 arms had been working quietly near one of the power units. He looked up at Tony's words with obvious interest, but quickly looked away when Hiskthar glared in his direction. "The systems work perfectly as designed," the Elder Commander stated firmly. "They have worked this way for millennia without failure." "Sure," Tony agreed, "but working and working efficiently are two different things. On Earth, we learned early that just because something works doesn't mean it can't be improved." "Doctor." Susan Wright had been studying the various alien species they encountered during the tour. She noticed that while beings like Hiskthar wore elaborate robes and spoke with authority, many others wore simple work clothes and kept their eyes downcast when the leadership was present. "Excuse me," Susan said to the 4-armed alien who had been listening to Tony's comments. "What's your name?" The creature looked startled at being addressed directly. "I am Crix, honored visitor," he replied in heavily accented but clear English. "I maintain the power systems." "Maintain them how?" Susan asked with genuine interest. Crix glanced nervously at Hiskthar before answering. "I clean the crystal housings and replace worn components. I have studied the systems for many cycles, but I am not permitted to suggest modifications." "Not permitted?" Susan asked. "Why not?" "The Zektar species serves in maintenance roles," Hiskthar interrupted coldly. "They lack the intellectual capacity for innovation. That is reserved for the Veltar and our senior alliance species." Susan felt her temper flare at the casual dismissal, but Jake caught her eye and shook his head slightly. They were guests here, and starting an argument wouldn't help anyone. Lisa Park had been studying the layout of the technology center and noticed something odd. "Captain, look at how this place is organized. Each species seems to work in completely separate sections. There's no collaboration between them." She was right. The fish-like beings worked on water systems in one area, while crystalline creatures handled mineral processing in another. Each group used their own tools and methods, with no apparent sharing of knowledge or techniques. Amy Carter had been listening to conversations throughout the facility and was disturbed by what she heard. Captain, the different species aren't just separated physically. They're forbidden from sharing information. Each group only knows about their own specialty. That explains the inefficiency, Tony muttered. They've got all these brilliant specialists, but they're not allowed to work together. As they continued the tour, Jake began to see the pattern more clearly. The Dominion wasn't really an advanced civilization at all. It was a collection of species held in carefully separated roles, prevented from combining their knowledge and skills. The result was technological stagnation, disguised as stability. Ambassador Zethkar, Jake said as they walked through a manufacturing area, how often do you update your technologies? Update? Zethkar looked confused by the question. The Dominion's technologies have been perfected over thousands of years. There is no need for change. But what about new discoveries? New ways of doing things? Lisa asked. Innovation is carefully controlled, Hiskthar explained. Unregulated change leads to chaos and conflict. The Dominion maintains order through consistency. They stopped at an observation deck overlooking a massive industrial complex. Hundreds of different alien species worked in carefully organized sections. Each group focused on their assigned tasks. The scale was impressive, but Jake noticed the obvious inefficiencies everywhere. It's like watching separate companies that refuse to talk to each other. Tony observed quietly. Dr. Wright was watching the alien workers with growing concern. Captain, look at their body language. The ones in charge stand tall and confident, but everyone else shows clear signs of depression and resignation. How long has the Dominion operated this way? Jake asked Hiskthar. For over 10,000 years, the elder commander replied proudly. We have brought peace and stability to countless worlds. Peace, Susan repeated, watching a group of small, furry aliens being supervised by much larger guards. Is that what you call this? Order, Hiskthar corrected. Each species knows their place and fulfills their function. There is no conflict because there is no confusion about roles. Amy had been quietly recording conversations throughout the facility, and she pulled Jake aside during a break in the tour. Captain, you need to hear this, she said, playing back a conversation between two of the maintenance workers. The recording was in an alien language, but the computer had provided a translation. Did you hear what the human said about the power crystals? He thinks they could work better. Maybe if we tried his suggestion when the Veltar aren't watching. The workers are interested in Tony's ideas, Amy explained, but they're afraid to try anything new because innovation is forbidden for their species. Jake felt a familiar anger building in his chest. He had spent his career fighting for the underdog, and seeing intelligent beings forced into intellectual slavery because of their species made his blood boil. Tony, he said quietly, would Crix's ideas about the power systems actually work? Probably better than mine, Tony admitted. He's been working with these crystals for years. He knows their quirks and limitations better than anyone. If he had access to proper tools and the freedom to experiment, he could probably revolutionize their entire power grid. But he's not. Allowed to because he's the wrong species, Lisa said bitterly. That's about to change, Jake decided. During the next stop on their tour, Jake made his move. They were in a research facility where Veltar scientists were working on what Hiskthar described as cutting-edge energy research. The humans could see immediately that the research was hundreds of years behind what Earth had already achieved. This is fascinating, Jake said loudly enough for everyone in the room to hear. On Earth, we found that the best innovations come from collaboration between different specialists. An engineer might have an idea that a physicist can improve. which a chemist can then implement in a completely new way. Impossible, one of the Veltar scientists scoffed. Inferior species cannot contribute meaningfully to advanced research. Really? Tony said, walking over to their main experimental setup. Because I see at least 3 ways this could be. Improved just by asking a maintenance worker who actually handles the equipment every day. Maintenance workers? The scientist looked horrified. They are Zektar. They cannot understand theoretical science. Want to bet? Jake asked with a smile. Before Hiskthar could stop him, Jake called out to Crix, who had been quietly cleaning equipment in the corner. Crix, could you take a look at this experiment and tell us what you think? The 4-armed alien approached nervously, clearly terrified of being noticed by the Veltar scientists. But as he examined their setup, his expression changed from fear to fascination. The resonance field is unstable because the crystal alignment is wrong, Crix said hesitantly. If you rotated the primary crystal 15 degrees and added a secondary harmonic buffer, the output would increase by at least 40%. The Veltar scientists stared at him in shock. Their equipment readings confirmed that Crix was absolutely correct. How did you know that? One of them demanded. I have cleaned and maintained thousands of these crystals, Crix replied, gaining confidence. I have seen which configurations work best, but I was never allowed to suggest changes. Jake smiled at the stunned silence that followed. Looks like you've been wasting some pretty valuable knowledge, he said to Hiskthar. The elder commander's skin had darkened to almost purple with what Jake assumed was anger. This changes nothing, he said coldly. A natural order cannot be overturned by a single anomaly. Maybe not, Jake agreed, but it sure makes you wonder what other anomalies you've been ignoring. As they continued the tour, Jake noticed that word of Crix's success was spreading quickly through the facility's maintenance staff. 3 days after Crix's demonstration, Jake Morrison sat in his quarters aboard the USS Endeavour, reading reports from his crew about their ongoing observations of Dominion society. What they had discovered was both fascinating and deeply troubling. Captain, Amy Carter said over the ship's communication system, "You need to see what I've been monitoring from the local communication networks." Jake made his way to the bridge, where Amy had set up a complex array of translation equipment. The screens showed conversations from across the Dominion capital, and the patterns were unmistakable. The maintenance workers aren't just talking about Crix's success, Amy explained. They're sharing their own ideas about improvements they've thought of, but never been allowed to suggest. It's like opening a dam. Lisa Park looked up from her navigation station, where she had been studying the city's traffic patterns. Captain, I've been watching how the different species move through the city. The ones in charge use the main thoroughfares, while everyone else is restricted to service corridors and back alleys. Physical segregation to match the intellectual segregation, Dr. Susan Wright observed as she joined them on the bridge. I've been studying their medical facilities, and it's the same pattern. Each species only receives treatment from their own kind, even when other species might have better medical knowledge. Tony Rodriguez emerged from the engineering section with a tablet full of technical data. Captain, I've been analyzing the infrastructure throughout this city, and it's a mess. They've got at least 6 different species working on transportation systems, but none of them are allowed to coordinate. The result is a network that barely functions. Jake absorbed this information while staring out at the massive alien city through the view screen. So we've accidentally started something by treating people as equals instead of following their caste system. More than that, Susan said grimly. I think we've shown them that their entire social structure is built on a lie. These species aren't naturally limited to specific roles. They've been forced into them. The communication panel chimed with an incoming message from Ambassador Zithkar. His image appeared on the main screen, and Jake could see that the alien diplomat looked troubled. Captain Morrison, Zethkar began. Elder Commander Hiskthar wishes to demonstrate the superiority of Dominion military technology. You and your crew are invited to observe a training exercise." Jake exchanged glances with his crew. In his experience, when someone wanted to show off their military power, it usually meant they were planning to use it. "When and where?" Jake asked. "Tomorrow, at the orbital defense platform. Transport will be provided," Zethkar replied, then cut the connection. That sounded ominous. Lisa commented. Tony was already pulling up technical specifications on his console. "Captain, I've been studying their weapons technology. It's powerful, but it follows the same pattern as everything else here. Each weapon system is designed by a single species and built by another, with no integration or innovation." "Are you saying their military is as inefficient as their civilian infrastructure?" Jake asked. "Probably worse," Tony replied. "Military technology benefits more than anything from cross-disciplinary innovation. If they're preventing that, their weapons are probably centuries behind what they could be." The next morning, Jake and his senior staff were transported to the orbital defense platform in a sleek Dominion shuttle. The platform was enormous, bristling with weapons that looked impressive, but somehow outdated to Jake's experienced eye. Elder Commander Hiskthar was waiting for them in the observation deck, along with several other high-ranking Dominion officials. Through the massive transparent aluminum windows, they could see a formation of Dominion warships arranged in precise formation. "Today you will witness the power that maintains order throughout the galaxy," Hiskthar announced. "Our target practice will demonstrate why resistance to the Dominion is futile." Jake noticed that the target practice involved a series of derelict ships that looked suspiciously like they might once have belonged to species that had refused to submit. The implication was clear. "Impressive setup," Jake said casually. "Mind if we watch from our own ship? We'd like to record this for our historical archives." Hiskthar's expression suggested he saw through Jake's polite request, but he nodded agreement. "Very well, but you will maintain a safe distance and not interfere with the exercise." Jake and his crew returned to the USS Endeavour and moved to what they considered a safe observation distance. As they watched, the Dominion fleet began their demonstration, firing massive energy beams at the derelict targets. "Their weapons are powerful," Tony admitted, "but look at how they're using them." Jake studied the attack pattern and realized what Tony meant. Each ship was firing independently, with no coordination or tactical planning. They were simply overwhelming their targets with brute force rather than using strategy or precision. "It's like watching a bunch of people with hammers trying to perform surgery," Lisa observed. Amy was monitoring Dominion communications during the exercise. "Captain, they're not just showing off for us. This is being broadcast throughout Dominion space as a demonstration of power. To keep their subject species in line," Susan said angrily. The demonstration continued for nearly an hour, with various Dominion ships taking turns destroying helpless targets. Jake was beginning to think the whole thing was just an elaborate threat when Amy suddenly stiffened at her station. "Captain, I'm picking up multiple ships approaching our position. They're not part of the exercise." Jake looked at the tactical display and saw a formation of 6 Dominion vessels breaking away from the main group and heading directly toward the Endeavour. Their weapons were powered, but not yet targeting. "Hail them," Jake ordered. The lead ship responded, and Hiskthar's image appeared on the screen. But something was different about the Elder Commander's expression. Gone was the diplomatic courtesy, replaced by cold determination. "Captain Morrison," Hiskthar said, "your presence has become a destabilizing influence on Dominion society. For the good of galactic order, your ship and crew must be eliminated." "So much for hospitality," Jake muttered. Then, louder, "Elder Commander, we're just observers here. We have no intention of interfering with your society, your very existence." Interferes, Hiskthar replied. You have shown our subject species concepts that threaten the natural order. This cannot be allowed to continue. The 6 Dominion ships moved into attack formation, their weapon systems charging with ominous energy buildup. Jake had faced long odds before in his military career, but never quite like this. All hands battle stations, Jake announced calmly, over the ship's intercom. This is not a drill. Tony was already at his engineering console, bringing the Endeavor's defensive systems online. Captain, our shields are up, but they won't last long against those weapons. We've got maybe 3 minutes before they punch through. Weapons status? Jake asked. Don Cooper, the weapons officer, looked up from his station with a grim expression. We've got mining lasers, plasma cutters for asteroid work, and some defensive missiles. Nothing designed for ship-to-ship combat against military. Vessels. Well, Jake said with a slight smile, I guess we'll have to get creative. Tony, what do we know about their ship designs? They're built for overwhelming firepower, but not much maneuverability, Tony replied, his fingers flying over his controls. Heavy armor, massive weapons, but they turn like freight trains. Lisa was already plotting evasive courses on her navigation display. Captain, if we can stay close and keep moving, their big guns might have trouble tracking us. The first Dominion ship fired, sending a beam of energy that would have vaporized the Endeavor if Lisa hadn't already begun evasive maneuvers. The shot passed harmlessly through space where they had been seconds before. Nice flying, Jake complimented. Dan, target their sensor arrays with the mining lasers. If they can't see us clearly, they can't hit us. The Endeavor's mining lasers were designed to cut through solid rock, and they performed admirably against the Dominion ship's sensor equipment. Within minutes, 2 of the attacking vessels were firing blind, their shots going wide. Captain, Amy called out, I'm detecting massive interest in this battle from ships throughout the system. Everyone's watching. Good, Jake replied. Let's give them a show. Tony, can we use the plasma cutters as weapons? Not directly, Tony said, but I might be able to overload them and create a feedback pulse. It won't destroy their ships, but it should disable their weapons temporarily. Do it. The Endeavor danced between the larger Dominion vessels, using its superior maneuverability to avoid their powerful but slow-tracking weapons. When Tony triggered the plasma cutter overload, the resulting energy pulse washed over 3 of the attacking ships, causing their weapons to go offline. Their weapons are down, but not for long. Don reported. Jake studied the tactical situation and made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. Lisa, take us right up against the lead ship's hull, close enough to touch. Captain? Lisa asked, uncertain. Trust me, Jake said. The Endeavor moved in close to the massive Dominion warship, so close that their hulls were almost touching. The alien vessel couldn't bring its weapons to bear without risking damage to itself. The news of the human victory over Elder Commander Hiskthar's fleet spread through Dominion space faster than anyone had expected. Within days, Jake Morrison found himself at the center of a galactic crisis that no one had seen coming. Captain, Amy Carter reported from her communication station. I'm monitoring transmissions from 17 different star systems. The subject species are organizing, and they're using our encounter with the Dominion fleet as proof that the Veltar aren't invincible. Jake sat in his command chair, studying reports from across the galaxy. What had started as an accidental first contact had somehow triggered the largest uprising in Dominion history. What kind of organizing are we talking about? Work strikes, refusal to follow orders, and in some systems, open rebellion, Amy replied. The Zigtar in the Antilles sector have seized control of 3 power generation facilities. The aquatic Merdai have shut down water processing on 12 worlds. Dr. Susan Wright looked up from her xenobiological studies with concern. "Captain, we may have underestimated how oppressed these species were. Some of them haven't had basic freedoms for thousands of years." Tony Rodriguez emerged from the engineering bay with a tablet full of technical data. "Captain, I've been in communication with Crix and other maintenance workers throughout the Dominion. They've been sharing the modifications we suggested, and the results are incredible. Power efficiency is up 40% on some worlds. But that's not the best part," Tony continued with excitement. "They're not just implementing our ideas. They're improving on them and creating new innovations of their own. When you give smart people the freedom to think, amazing things happen." Lisa Park had been monitoring the political situation from her navigation station. "Captain, we're getting requests for assistance from rebel groups on over 30 worlds. They want human advisors to help them overthrow Dominion control." Jake felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He had never intended to start a galactic revolution, but that seemed to be exactly what was happening. What's the Dominion leadership doing about all this? According to Intercepted Communications, they're preparing a massive military response, Amy reported. Elder Commander Hiskthar has been placed under arrest for his failure against us, but the rest of the Veltar leadership is mobilizing every available warship. "How many ships are we talking about?" Jake asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. "Over 3,000 vessels, Captain," Lisa replied grimly. "They're calling it the Great Cleansing Fleet. Their plan is to destroy every world that has joined the rebellion and make an example that will prevent future uprisings." Jake stood and walked to the main view screen, looking out at the stars that now seemed filled with conflict and uncertainty. 3,000 ships against a bunch of maintenance workers and farmers. That's not a battle. That's a massacre. "Unless someone evens the odds," Tony said quietly. Jake turned to look at his crew, seeing the same determination in their eyes that he felt growing in his own chest. "We're talking about going up against the entire Dominion military with one ship. That's not evening the odds, that's suicide." "Maybe," Susan said, "but what's the alternative? Let them slaughter billions of beings whose only crime was believing they deserved to be treated as equals." Amy was monitoring communications channels when she suddenly straightened in her chair. "Captain, I'm getting a priority transmission from the rebel forces. They're requesting a meeting with you." "Where?" Jake asked. "The mining world of Kepler 7. It's a neutral space, halfway between Dominion territory and the rebel systems." Jake made his decision quickly, the way he always did when lives were on the line. Set course for Kepler 7, full speed. The journey took 2 days, during which Jake and his crew prepared for what might be their final mission. When they arrived at the mining world, they found it bustling with activity. Ships from dozens of different species filled the orbital space, and the surface was covered with temporary structures housing refugees from Dominion worlds. Jake beamed down to the surface with his senior staff and found himself in the middle of the most diverse gathering he had ever seen. Beings of every size, shape, and color imaginable had come together with a single purpose: freedom from Dominion oppression. Crix, the four-armed Zektar engineer they had met on the capital world, approached them with what Jake assumed was a smile on his alien features. "Captain Morrison, you came." "Of course we came," Jake replied. "Oh, I'm not sure what we can do against 3,000 warships." "More than you think," said a new voice. Jake turned to see a tall, crystalline being whose body seemed to reflect light in patterns that hurt to look at directly. "I am Vexara of the Silthic. We have been monitoring Dominion communications." "And," Jake prompted, "the Great Cleansing Fleet is indeed massive, but it suffers from the same problems as the rest of Dominion society. Each species' ships operate independently, with no coordination or combined tactics. They rely on overwhelming force rather than strategy. Tony was immediately interested. You're saying they're powerful but inefficient? Precisely, Vexara replied. However, we have something they do not: cooperation between species with complementary abilities. Over the next several hours, Jake learned about the incredible diversity of capabilities represented by the rebel species. The Murdai could manipulate water and other liquids with amazing precision. The rock-like Torgen were natural miners and engineers. The bird-like Aranus were incredible pilots with reflexes no other species could match. Each of our species was forced into narrow roles by the Dominion, Crix explained. But working together, we can accomplish things none of us could do alone. What do you need from us? Jake asked. Leadership, Vexara replied simply. Your species seems to have a natural ability to coordinate different groups and bring out the best in everyone. We need someone who can help us work together effectively. Jake looked around at the assembled beings, seeing hope in dozens of different types of eyes. I'm not a general. I'm just a starship captain. You're the captain who showed mercy to enemies and treated maintenance workers as equals, Crix said. You're the human who proved that cooperation works better than domination. That makes you exactly what we need. The preparation for the coming battle took weeks, during which Jake discovered just how much the Dominion had wasted by keeping their subject species separated. Working together, the rebel forces created innovations that none of them could have achieved alone. The Murdai and Modai Torgen collaborated to create new types of hull armor that could shift between solid and liquid states, making ships nearly impossible to target effectively. The Aranus worked with human engineers to develop fighter craft that moved like living creatures rather than mechanical vehicles. Most importantly, the rebel forces learned to fight as a unified fleet rather than separate groups. Jake found himself naturally falling into the role of coordinator, helping different species understand each other's capabilities and find ways to work together. When the Dominion fleet finally arrived at the rebel stronghold, they faced something completely unexpected. Instead of the chaotic rabble they had anticipated, they found a coordinated force that moved with purpose and precision. The battle that followed would be remembered throughout galactic history as the day cooperation defeated domination. A rebel fleet led by humans who treated every species as valuable partners systematically dismantled the Dominion's overwhelming force through superior tactics and innovative technology. Jake watched from the bridge of the USS Endeavor as 3,000 years of oppression ended in a single day. The Dominion ships, designed for intimidation rather than actual combat, found themselves outmaneuvered and outhought by opponents they had underestimated for millennia. When Elder Commander Vex Thal, the Dominion fleet's leader, finally requested terms of surrender, Jake offered the same mercy he had shown to Hiskthar. Repair their ships, treat their wounded, and let them return home with a message. Tell the Dominion leadership that the galaxy has changed, Jake said during the surrender ceremony. The age of species domination is over. From now on, we work together as equals, or we don't work together at all. 6 months later, Jake stood on the observation deck of the new Galactic Cooperative Headquarters, watching ships from hundreds of worlds arrive for the first truly democratic galactic assembly in recorded history. The USS Endeavor was finally ready to return to Earth, but Jake knew that humanity would never be isolated again. Captain, Crix said, approaching with a datapad full of the latest innovations from their combined research efforts. The first class of students has arrived at the Cooperative University. Beings from every world, learning from each other. Jake smiled as he watched young members of dozens of species working together on projects that would have been impossible under the old Dominion system. I think we accidentally did something good, Crix. Not accidentally, Captain, the four-armed engineer replied. You showed us something we had forgotten, that intelligence and worth have nothing to do with species or age. They come from how you treat others and what you contribute to the common good. As the USS Endeavour prepared for its journey home to Earth, Jake reflected on how a simple faster-than-light drive malfunction had somehow changed the entire galaxy.